treasure from the tree, right from the tree.
Hello and welcome all. We're excited to have you here. My name is Theo Schwartz. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm from Utah. I'm one of the youth involved in planning this conference. Each day, you can expect a new youth leader to welcome you and a federal staff from the Region 8 Adolescent and Young Adult Work Group to close the day. The planning team for the summit has been meeting regularly since the fall of 2021 to collectively prioritize important issues for youth and young adults today, and to use our leadership skills to share our perspectives and how you, as professionals working with youth and young adults, can most positively address those issues. And while we're pleased and honored to share our program with you throughout the summit, we do make the disclaimer that the views presented are those of the speakers and do not reflect official opinion, policy, or endorsement from the Region 8 Federal Adolescent and Young Adult Work Group, who has made this event possible. Central to this three-day summit are the themes of connectedness, resiliency, and empowerment. The educational content of the summit is the logistical application of being connected. The passion felt within the stories and perspectives shared here are the testimony of resiliency. The choice to authentically engage with youth and young adults in your work is invaluable. I am proud of this team and of you for coming to take action for a meaningful and progressive present and future. Before we begin with some logistics about the summit, we'd like to ask you to join us in a land acknowledgement. We honor elders past, present, and future, and those who have stewarded our land throughout generations. We also recognize that government, academic, and cultural institutions were founded upon and continue to enact exclusions of erasure of Indigenous, forcefully relocated, and enslaved peoples. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of oppression and inequities and recognize the current and future contributions of these communities across our region. Thank you for this participation in this land acknowledgement, and thank you for joining us in this summit. And now for some logistics. Throughout the summit, you'll notice that we have Alson, a live artist from the Sketch Effect, joining our event. Alson is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia, and he will be active listening throughout all of our sessions to bring what is shared to life in a visually compelling and memorable way. At the end of each day, we will devote some focus to Alson's observations. We will also be including these visual portrayals in an email we send to all registrants at the end of the summit. The summit is also being recorded, so a link to all these recordings, along with the slides that are shared, will be included in that email. And now I'd like to introduce you to Amber Woodside. Amber is a native Coloradian serving as a Youth Voice Amplified Committee member with the Association of Maternal and Child Health Programs, speaking from the perspective of a rural LGBTQ+ autistic young person.
Hi, my name is Bryn. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name is Cameron.
My name is Theo Schwartz. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Ava. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, my name is Katie Raimundo.
My name is Gwen Upmark. I use they, them pronouns.
My name's Madison Kimbrough. My pronouns are they, he.
My name is Chloe Raimundo. My pronouns are she, they.
My name is Bridget. I come from Utah.
Utah.
South Dakota.
Wyoming.
North Dakota.
Colorado.
I'm 15.
I'm 15.
I'm 17.
I'm 17 years old.
I'm 18.
I'm 21.
I'm 23 years old.
And I identify as transmasc.
Either bisexual or queer.
Queer and labelless.
Bisexual.
A non-binary trans guy. And I'm asexual and pan.
I'm trans and non-binary.
Non-binary, demisexual, Jewish.
Bisexual. I am Latinx.
I'm a biracial first generation person.
That's actually been a big issue for me. When I was getting my physical in the fall, I told my doctor that I identified as trans, and she asked me if I identified as trans, like how I knew I identified as trans if I wasn't sexually active. And when I tried to educate her about how those two things aren't related, she tried to push me off and act like she knew more than I did, which is really annoying as someone who is trans and deserves, healthcare. That does give me fear for the future, mostly because as a trans person, I, am looking to medically transition, and I will be seeing doctors in the future. And I also have, numerous health conditions, so it is something that I will not be able to avoid. And so I would like to have a doctor that's not like her, that is educated.
It can be very difficult, particularly as a trans person, to come out to healthcare specialists and have them fully understand, what it actually means to be a trans person and how aspects of my transition are actually important to my mental and physical health. I've had situations where a mental health care professional has told me that my hormone therapy for my transition is not necessary and that I should stop taking it. I've had situations where my primary care physician laughed and said she didn't know what gender affirming care meant. And those sorts of things can be very difficult to overcome and to decide to push through and actually continue doing the work needed to care for myself physically and to stay on a good medicine regimen and just take care of myself and be willing to talk to other doctors about things that are important.
One is when I saw a primary care provider after I injured my foot while running. I was running, put my foot in a hole. It hurt a lot. I couldn't walk for a week. I went to a primary care provider. It was an urgent care clinic, and I was like, "Hi, my name is Gwen." I didn't even tell them my pronouns at first. I was like, I have a hurt leg. Can we focus on that? And they were like, "Yeah, totally. What drugs are you currently taking?" I was like, "Well, I'm taking these hormones and, I'm trans. And so I've been taking those to help my mental health and help align my body with how I feel inside." And they were like, "Oh, yeah. We've heard of trans people. That's great. I just have 1,000 more questions for you." So I was like, "Okay, sure. I know I'm one of the first trans people you've met, probably. Sure, let's go through the questions." And we go through them one by one by one. And all of a sudden, my appointment's almost up. And I'm like, hey, could we focus on my leg? She was like, "Yeah, totally. I think it's your hormones." And I was like, "Excuse me, ma'am? I've been taking these for years. Also, lots of other people take these. It's definitely not my hormones. It's definitely the hole that I stepped in." And we kind of went back and forth, and she kind of went, "Look, I'm the doctor and I know better," which she didn't, sort of evidently, given that I never, her care did not help me. I left the appointment, and I went out to my car, and I sat in the driver's seat, and I cried for a good 10 minutes, just sort of aghast at what had happened. And then I drove home and just sort of rested and iced and elevated my foot for the next 2 weeks until it was okay to walk on it. And about a month later, I received a bill in the mail, which I really appreciated. I did not appreciate it. It was like a second slap in the face. Still kind of wish that I was able to access proper care, and that just seems like such a low ask for our medical system. I'm not even looking for gender affirming care anymore. I'm just hoping for gender ambivalent care. I just want it to be about my hurt foot. I would like if doctors could treat me as a person who has medical needs. And they're not.
A common fear is, what everybody in my communities or people who identify with things that I do, something that we all fear is being discriminated against, especially by things that we can't control. Kind of like what Chloe said, as soon as they hear that you might go by different pronouns than how you might appear, or perhaps how they might want you to appear, it's suddenly like they're talking to a different person. Of course, being a young woman already, I feel that many times it's a little bit harder to be taken seriously. So it's kind of that fear that I will, have an issue and people won't be able to take it seriously. especially as being a youth, our words are often taken as a little bit more frivolous, uneducated, unexperienced. And I run into that a lot. So that's definitely one of my personal fears. And something else I would say, of course, something that I wish didn't have to play such a big role in healthcare, but sadly enough it does, but our race, our ethnicities. I mean, being from two different ethnicities who are not part of the white race, of course, there's that fear that by, born looking a certain way, you will be treated and, probably respected at different levels. It was proven that Black women were at a very much higher risk of injury or death in child labor simply because they were Black. And these type of things really reinforce that fear and that standard of, insecurity that many people might have going into the healthcare system, wondering if they're actually going to be heard or if they're actually going to be helped the way that they're asking people to do so.
The first thing is to talk about it. The small but noticeable signs really help me to feel validated. Sharing pronouns when you meet someone, talk about partners instead of just girlfriends or boyfriends. Having ally symbols or pride symbols around an office space can help to show that someone's accepting.
Having like pamphlets and information that's inclusive of like queer people, so like that's trans people, that's like gay people, lesbians, whoever, like knowing, I want my doctor to like know about that, and I want them to like be comfortable talking about it and like be comfortable having like information and posters and condoms and contraceptive care.
Asking questions if nicknames are okay, what my pronouns are, stuff like that.
But not just asking about them once. Like, for example, I go to a hospital system here and they ask you to put on your chart what your pronouns are, but very rarely do people actually review that and look at what my pronouns are and actually use them. I've changed my pronouns a few times in the past couple of years, so asking often would be helpful, as well as not making assumptions about gender and sexuality. Again, I present as someone who's femme, but I don't identify as a girl. The number one mistake that I feel like people make, and this is really common, and it's a little thing, is saying sorry when you mess up someone's pronouns, because that prompts them to say it's okay, when often it doesn't feel okay when someone misgenders you. And so instead saying thank you for correcting me.
Educate yourself on their identities and what it means.
Do a little bit of work yourself. You should also be willing to go to Google and look up what are pronouns if you don't understand.
I mean, some adults really are coming up to, some queer folks, expecting them to suddenly explain everything about themselves, when that pressure really is not on the person that you're asking.
Knowing the basic concept of what non-binary is, knowing the basic concept of what demisexual is, just to have an idea.
You're never going to understand someone's identity as well as they do. You don't have to understand all of the nuance of it. You just have to do what they ask you to, use the name they ask you to, and not ask super personal questions that you're not entitled to, and use the correct pronouns.
One thing that's also really important is presenting resources for people that come from minority backgrounds, because that makes us feel like you really care about any type of struggles that we might be facing.
Showing that like you care about youth and you care about queer people and themselves.
I understand that a lot of adults weren't born in the generation that me and a lot of other youth were born in, and sometimes they feel like this is complicated, that pronouns are harder to understand, that this isn't how English works. But I feel like if you could take the time to understand how one is feeling, and if this little thing will make them feel like they belong in this world, which they do deserve to be a part of, then really that's all that matters. And if you could just try to understand, then that would be more than enough for me.
Just blatantly disrespect it and don't use my name and pronouns. which often is really frustrating.
For me, as a bisexual, it was really discouraging when I first came out, and adults would continue to ask me about whether or not I would get a boyfriend. And in doing that, they were invalidating the rest of my identity and the different possibilities of people who I could be with.
I think having my identity validated, I haven't really had it validated by adults. I don't super like tell people all the time, especially adults. That's kind of led me to feel like some shame about it, like that I shouldn't be telling people, that I shouldn't be like thinking about this or thinking about sex or anything. So just the idea that like it's something that I should be keeping a secret and that I should like have to, you know, come out and tell people. And it makes me feel like a lot worse mentally, knowing that like I've got like a secret, even if it's not that big of a secret for most adults anymore, it still feels like a secret.
Queerness is not separate from the rest of who someone is. I'm an autistic person and I'm an otherwise disabled person. Is very intrinsically linked to my queerness. You can't access services for only one of those things and feel safe if they're not also inclusive of all the other parts of who you are. No one is just one identity. We're all made up of all these different things and they all interact with each other 100% of the time.
Identity as a queer person is like pretty integral to like my identity as a woman, where like those two things kind of go together a lot for me. It's like I'm a woman, I'm also a queer woman. And then I think it's had my political identity too, because I think I really came to my own like politically, same as I did like finding out that I was queer. They kind of happened together, and I think they really informed each other in a lot of ways.
Because I'm a young person, it's just very difficult to be taken seriously in any type of aspect, you know, career or in my personal life. I'm also female presenting, so being non-binary is not really very easy to convey in the way that I want my identity to be respected.
Being raised in a mixed Latinx household has really helped me with acceptance, I would say, because when one is a minority, I feel like it helps in relatability with other aspects. We come from two different cultures. My mother is from Taiwan and my father is from Peru, so very different parts of the world right there. But I think something that the two cultures kind of share in common is the traditional values. Being a part of the LGBTQ in a family with mostly traditional values, well, it can be a little bit challenging in itself. So I don't want to sound cynical, especially in contrast to, you know, Chloe's, you know, positive outlook on it, but there are some negative aspects of it. My cultures that I come from, they really do stand to support the youth and the children and the people in their family, but at the same time, there is a certain mold that they want their youth to be fitting into. And many times, especially in our modern, what I would call our modern age, you know, we happen to be breaking those molds that our, you know, traditional parents might accept from us.
So I am neurodivergent, ADHD specifically, and I have struggled with mental health problems, including anxiety, basically my whole life. Those diagnoses were important in my journey to discovering who I was, as well as my LGBT identity. For the longest time before that, I felt very othered. And that's a common factor between neurodivergent people and LGBT people. And both of them, I also believe, contributed to my mental health worsening because I didn't have the resources that I needed and adults to talk to about them. Growing up very highly religious, I didn't know who I was safe to go talk to, and particularly in the Midwest, it's a very religious community that I was surrounded by, so I didn't talk to adults. That contributed to me feeling sadder and losing sleep and probably other health problems and just high stress overall.
That was a great video. Thank you for the team who developed that video. So we have 3 youth panelists, Amber, Bridget, and Theo, who will answer and discuss any questions you may have. So please go ahead and submit any questions in the chat, and our panelists will respond then. You can write those questions in Spanish as well, if you feel comfortable, and I will translate them for the panelists so they can answer them.
And can someone pin Bridget as well?
Yeah, Bridget is connected.
So I'm here, and I will be soon, I assume.
Yeah, I just meant pin her to the screen, like Theo and I are.
Thank you, Amber. Patty, did you get that? If you could pin Bridget so she's next to Amber and Theo and Sarai in this panel discussion.
I just pinned her.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You can see the pin. Sure.
So Natrifia Miller, she say, thank you all for being so open and vulnerable.
Thank you. It was fun.
So again, this is a time for you guys to be able to interact with the panelists and to ask questions. So please go ahead and ask those questions through the chat, and we will let the panelists know what your questions are so they can talk and discuss about them. So Natrifia say also, well, you are one of the few people to say my name correctly without my phonetics there, which I forgot. Well, thank you to know, Natrifia. Isabel, thank you all for your vulnerability, such as an important conversation.
While we're waiting for some questions to come in, do either of you two want to speak to your experience having participated in making that video? I know I was kind of behind the scenes, but how was it for you both?
Well, I think I'm just going to quickly jump in here then. My name is Bridget Raimundo. I was in the video and my pronouns are she, he, ze. Forgot to mention those earlier. And I would just like to say, I didn't realize at the time when Chloe and Carrie were featured in the video that they were actually going to be in the car with their parents. So I'm just really grateful that they were so honest and open about their experience. Being with, our parents is not easy because it's kind of a really conservative environment. So thinking about them being so young and so brave, I feel like that's an inspiration to me, at least, and I'm really proud of them.
So we have a question from Isabella. She's asking, I work from desk at the clinic. How can I bring up pronouns?
Sorry, my dogs are really wanting to participate. But I would say one way that I think, sorry, I'm gonna actually hold off until my dogs stop barking.
Okay, I would say it's just fine to ask, what are your pronouns, or what pronoun should I use? Because being direct and just being honest and polite, there's nothing wrong with that, especially when you convey the right intentions. And there's no need to make a big deal about it. You get the pronouns and you just move on. Maybe ask if there's any other background information that you need to know to administer the services that you're there for.
Okay, they're calmer now. But I would say the number one way that people can bring up pronouns is by introducing themselves with pronouns, because then you're not necessarily asking someone who may not be ready to come out yet. But you're really just introducing yourself to welcome that space and allow people to share if they feel comfortable.
Thank you, Tia and Bridget. So we have other questions from Susana and Hui. So one of the questions are, how can school teachers create a more inclusive environment? And Hui asked a related questions about how can state health departments promote more inclusivity and connectedness with peers and trusted adults?
I'd like to speak to the question about state level health departments promoting more inclusivity. I think there's two routes for that, and first and foremost is within the workplace. I mean, obviously it's a constant goal to be having young people as partners, actually doing the work themselves. And so again, introducing yourself with your pronouns, just being willing to use someone's pronouns or just accept their identity without having a bucket full of questions about their personal lives and how they feel about it is incredibly important. And then also on a procedural level, I mean, state level is where some of these, precedents are coming down from. And so if you're setting the tone of our intake forms at public health departments are inclusive, the first question they ask isn't, what is your biological sex? And the options for what do you identify as for your gender aren't just male, female, and other. Like it's creating the space for when people first come in to that health system, for them to understand that, like, I am accepted here and I don't have to worry about being questioned about this. And then also training, just making it clear that there are certain ways you shouldn't treat the LGBT community. And that's really integral. So just starting it at the state level and making it a standard for the county levels and lower.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was also
Go ahead, Theo.
I was also gonna agree. Pronouns are the number one way for me as a non-binary person who uses pronouns that don't necessarily match my appearance. Introducing self with pronouns, as well as creating, like, if you're asking on a form what someone's name is, creating a space for pronouns, as well as try using the language like pronouns instead of preferred pronouns. Since pronouns are not just preferred, they're required, as well as ensuring that you're asking for names that people go by instead of just their birth names, and not necessarily saying nickname, because for trans people, their name is their name. And so asking what name they go by in addition to their birth name, if you need their birth name. As well as just starting conversations around LGBTQ plus people, because the longer that we stay silent about things that we may be curious about, the less people are going to know, the less people are going to feel comfortable. And so really starting conversations around LGBTQ plus people, around pronouns, around definitions, and taking the time to research it yourself. There's a really tricky balance between asking LGBTQ plus people questions about their identity, as well as doing your own research, because everyone has their own meaning to their own sexuality or their own gender. And so really ensuring that you're asking questions that they feel comfortable with, like doing a quick Google search and asking, like, questions to not ask trans people. Like, don't ask about genitals, there's no need for that. Or asking about birth name if you don't need it, and things like that. Just really doing some Google research, and asking beforehand, like, I'm gonna ask a question that may or may not be appropriate to ask because I'm still learning. Is that okay? Getting consent before asking some of these questions, because some people just might not be in the space to educate, and that's okay. And so just getting that consent.
Thank you, Theo, for sharing that. So we have another question from Jonelli Lapierre, and is asking, how important is the physical space demonstrating inclusivity to promote safety and comfort?
I can speak on this. I think having little signs like a rainbow flag, or I'm actually working with this on some of the local mental health centers here, is creating like art that is subtly LGBTQ plus inclusive, that has like a subtle rainbow, or is the lesbian flag color, but it looks like a sunset. Just those little indicators that LGBTQ plus people are welcome there, because you might not necessarily think that it's not necessarily important for non-LGBTQ plus people to notice. While they may appreciate it, it's really important for actual LGBTQ plus. Sorry, I keep saying LGBTQ plus. I should also include Two-Spirit in there, but I'm still getting used to that terminology, so I apologize. But ensuring that there's subtle signs to not out people has been a really good idea. But I think really language is what matters most, in my opinion. That's not going to be the same for all LGBTQ plus people, but really language is the number one way to show that you care about the LGBTQ plus population.
Thank you, Theo, for sharing about that. It's so important, those details, to make and create a comfortable space for everyone and use a very inclusive language. Thank you for explaining us that. We have another question from Sherry, which aligns with the language part that you were explaining. So she say, this is the first time I have heard the term Z. Can you help educate us on this term?
And I'm going to assume that's in reference to me. So Z is another pronoun. It's under the categories of neopronouns, which are, I guess, new terminology and new pronouns that individuals make for themselves when they don't feel like they fit quite right into he, her, or they, or anything else that's out there already.
Thank you, Bridget, for answering that question. So Amber is saying, to address Susan's question, so Amber, would you like to explain that statement that you are sharing in the chat?
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to make sure that I got that in there under the time constraints, because I wanted to let my fellow panelists speak as well. But just in terms of how schools and teachers can create more welcoming environments and inclusive environments, there was this really fantastic thing I saw online. It was a teacher who gave their students this form. It was really small, and it just said, what is your what name do you want to be called by, and what are your pronouns? Can I use those pronouns and name in class? Can I use them around your parents? Can I use them around other faculty? And that was huge. Like, what it comes down to is you're addressing and validating your students every day. And to explain kind of my last point about ensuring that you're advocating for a student body, I think to some extent, like, you know, you've got these young people who are starting to come into their own, and they're trying to be authentic. And I think it's important to recognize, if you're in any kind of educational role, that you are supposed to be protecting and advocating for these young people. And so that might end up at some point being towards their family, right? If you've got a student's parents who are insistent about their child's pronouns, you know, you don't have to be aggressive about it, but you can continue to use the child's correct pronouns, even in the face of someone who is in their life that doesn't use those correct pronouns, right? It's just showing that respect and showing that you'll be consistent about that respect no matter who is speaking.
For sharing your questions, and thank you for to the panelists for being open and explaining us all that and your perspective, and helping us to see the world in new ways.
Let love shine in your heart each and every day.